The rocket screamed overhead before Sarah Walker saw it, an ATGM that turned the Humvee into a fireball 30 meters away. The shockwave slammed her against the crumbling wall, dust and smoke choking the air. Through ringing ears, she heard the whir of rotors. Drone. Close. The thermal signature would paint her in seconds, and the dogs, she could hear their handlers shouting in Arabic, were maybe 2 minutes out. She pressed against her shoulder wound, blood warm between her fingers. The ruined building offered no cover, just broken concrete and, wait, a steel plate beneath debris. Her boot kicked through rot-soft wood, revealing stairs descending into darkness. She dropped through as the drone's camera whined overhead, but halfway down, her NVGs caught something that stopped her cold. Boot prints in the dust. Fresh, American treads, and a light still burning in the room below. Sarah Walker settled into the sniper hide on the third floor of what used to be a hospital. The morning light cut through shattered windows, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like suspended snow. She adjusted the Harris bipod on her M110, checking sight picture on the convoy route below. 2 clicks east, her squad ran patrol through the remains of Al-Rasheed, a city that had been fought over so many times, the rubble had rubble. Overwatch, this is ground. Radio check. Sergeant Chen's voice crackled in her earpiece. Ground, Overwatch, I've got you clear. 2 vehicles, 8 dismounts, proceeding north on Route Silver. Sarah tracked them through her scope, noting the intervals between soldiers, the way their heads swiveled checking corners. Good discipline. She'd been running Overwatch for 3 weeks now, ever since the insurgents started hitting patrols with IEDs constructed from old Soviet ordnance. Someone in the chain of command decided they needed eyes high, and Sarah's record as a designated marksman made her the obvious choice. 12 confirmed kills in 18 months. Not that she kept count the way some guys did, notching rifles like they were in a Western. The building beneath her creaked, probably wind through the compromised structure, but she made a mental note anyway. This whole sector was unstable, literally and figuratively. Command had designated it historically significant, which was military speak for, we did something here we don't talk about. Her spotter, Private Michaels, shifted position beside her. Kid was 22, fresh from OSUT, still jumped at every loud noise. Walker, you ever wonder what this place was? Before, I mean. Hospital. Says so on the wall downstairs. Arabic script, but the red crescent gives it away. No, I mean before that. Reyes was telling me this whole grid square was a fob back in the day. Like way back. Cold War stuff. Sarah glanced at him. Reyes talked too much. He says there's bunkers under half these buildings. Decommissioned. Most of them aren't even on the maps anymore. Then they're not our problem. She returned to her scope. The patrol had stopped to check a vehicle, trunk open, some local explaining something with animated gestures. Standard Terry stop, nothing unusual. But Michaels was right about one thing. Tom Reyes did talk. 62 years old, technically a civilian contractor now, but everyone knew he'd been special forces back when that meant something different. He ran logistics from the main base, but he had a habit of telling stories about operations that weren't in any official record. Sarah had heard him once, late night in the DFAC, describing a facility that didn't exist on paper, but sure as hell existed in concrete. The way he'd said it made her skin prickle. Overwatch, ground, we're moving to checkpoint Bravo. Sarah keyed her radio. Copy ground, I'll reposition to keep visual. She gathered her kit, slinging the M110 across her back. Michaels folded the spotting scope, movements still uncertain, like he didn't trust his own hands yet. They'd run these patterns for weeks, patrol moves, Overwatch shifts, patrol moves again, rhythms that kept you alive or got you killed, depending on whether the enemy figured out the pattern first. Outside, the sun climbed higher, baking the ruins into shades of beige and gray. Somewhere in the distance, a call to prayer echoed across empty streets. Sarah checked her map, calculating the best sight line to Checkpoint Bravo. Another rooftop, another few hours of watching. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last normal morning she'd have for a very long time. Checkpoint Bravo sat at the intersection of two roads that no longer had names, just grid coordinates. Sarah climbed to her new position, a four-story apartment building with most of its western wall missing, exposing rooms like a cutaway diagram. She could see a child's bedroom, faded cartoon characters still visible on peeling wallpaper. A kitchen with a table set for a meal no one would eat. She pushed the thoughts away. Sympathy was a luxury you couldn't afford when your job was to put bullets in people at 800 meters. In position, she reported. Copy, Overwatch. Chen's voice had that tight quality it got when he was scanning for threats. Good instincts, Chen. He'd kept his people alive through 2 deployment rotations, which was more than most squad leaders could say. Michael set up the spotting scope, his movements smoother now that they'd done this a dozen times. You know what's weird? He said. There's no civilians. Sarah had noticed. Al-Rasheed wasn't empty. There were people here, locals who'd returned after the last offensive cleared out. But this sector, the one command marked historically significant, was a ghost town. No laundry hanging from windows. No kids kicking soccer balls through rubble. Just empty buildings and the occasional feral dog. Command says it's contaminated, Michaels continued, like chemically, but I talked to EOD and they said they've never found anything. Maybe that's the point, Sarah said. Tell people it's contaminated, they stay away. No civilian casualties to worry about. Contaminated with what, though? She didn't answer, because the truth was she didn't know, and the not knowing bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Through her scope, she watched the patrol move through the intersection. Chen had them in a good formation, bounding Overwatch, one fire team covering while the other moved. By the book, infantry tactics. She swept her sight picture across rooftops, windows, any position that could hide an enemy shooter. Nothing. But her instincts, the same ones that had kept her alive through Helmand Province and Mosul, were screaming that something was wrong. Ground, Overwatch, you're clear to proceed but stay sharp. This feels off. Copy that. Chen's voice carried the same unease. We're not liking it either. Sarah's finger rested along the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. You didn't chamber rounds and apply pressure unless you had a target. But she was ready. The M110 was loaded with 7.62 millimeter rounds, federal gold medal match ammunition that could punch through body armor at 600 meters. Her hand was steady, breathing controlled, heart rate slow. And then the world came apart. The first ATGM hit the lead Humvee before anyone saw it coming. AT-4 Spigot, probably, launched from somewhere in the ruins to the east. The vehicle lifted off the ground, chassis twisting like a crushed can, before slamming back down in a shower of burning metal and glass. Contact east! Chen's voice, no longer tight but screaming. RPGs! Multiple! The second explosion cut him off. Sarah was already moving, tracking east through her scope, searching for the launch signature. There, a window, 3rd floor, smoke still curling from the backblast. She put the crosshairs, center mass on the shadow behind it, and squeezed. The rifle bucked. Through the scope, she saw the figure jerk backward and disappear. One down, she reported, already shifting to scan for more targets. But they were everywhere. Muzzle flashes from a dozen positions, firing down on the patrol with coordinated precision. This wasn't an insurgent potshot. This was a planned ambush, and her squad was in the kill box. Overwatch, we need fire, now! Chen again, and she could hear the staccato crack of M4's returning fire, the heavier thump of the squad's 240 Bravo machine gun. Sarah worked the rifle like an extension of her body. Breathe, acquire, squeeze, rack the bolt. Another target down. Breathe. Acquire. Squeeze. The scope filled with smoke and chaos, but she filtered it out, focusing only on threats. A man with an RPG. Squeeze. Gone. A figure leaning out to throw a grenade. Squeeze. Collapsed. Beside her, Michaels was calling out ranges and positions, his voice surprisingly steady. 3 o'clock, rooftop, 200 meters. She was already on it. Squeezed. Miss. Compensate for wind. Squeezed again. Hit. But there were too many. For every target she dropped, two more appeared. This wasn't a firefight. This was an orchestrated slaughter, and someone had known exactly where the patrol would be. All units, this is ground. We're falling back to... The transmission ended in static and screaming. Sarah's blood went cold. Ground, say again. Chen, do you copy? Nothing. She switched frequencies, trying to reach anyone. Any station, this is Overwatch. Fire mission, grid. The ATGM hit her building before she finished the sentence. The world was sound and fury. Sarah felt herself lifted, weightless for a moment, before something hard slammed into her back and she was falling through smoke and debris. Her ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. She hit ground, or what used to be ground, and rolled, instinct making her curl into a ball as chunks of concrete rained down around her. When the noise stopped, she lay still, taking inventory. Fingers moving, toes responding, ribs hurt like hell but probably not broken. She opened her eyes to a world painted in shades of gray dust and drifting smoke. The M110 was gone, lost somewhere in the collapse. She still had her sidearm, though, a Sig Sauer M17 in her thigh holster. Sarah pushed herself up on shaking arms. The apartment building's third floor had pancaked into the second, and she'd fallen through both to land in what looked like a ground floor storage room. Above, daylight streamed through a ragged hole. She could see her observation post, or what was left of it, hanging at a precarious angle 3 stories up. Michaels. She keyed her radio. Michaels, do you copy? Static. Michaels! More static, and then, faintly, a sound that might have been breathing, or might have been her imagination. Sarah tried to stand, and her left shoulder screamed. She looked down and saw blood, dark and wet, spreading across her ACU top. Not her blood, too much of it. She touched the source gingerly, and her hand came away red. A piece of rebar, maybe 6 inches long, had punched through the meat of her shoulder, just below the collarbone. Not arterial, she'd be unconscious already if it was, but bad enough. She fumbled for her IFAK, pulling out a compressed bandage with her good hand, slapped it over the wound, feeling the instant burn of clotting agent hitting exposed tissue, wrapped it tight, using her teeth to secure the knot. The pressure helped, but she could feel blood still seeping warm against her skin. Outside, the firefight continued. Automatic weapons fire, the crump of grenades, men screaming in languages she did and didn't understand. She needed to move, needed to find Chen, find the squad, call in a QRF before this whole sector got overrun. But when she tried the radio again, all she got was static. The building groaned, structure compromised, ready to finish what the missile started. Sarah grabbed her rifle. No, wait, her rifle was gone. Just the pistol then. 17 rounds in the mag, 1 in the chamber. She checked it, hands moving on autopilot through functions she'd performed 10,000 times. A sound froze her. Close. Too close. Barking. Dogs. Sarah had seen what insurgents did with attack dogs in this AO. Imported them from Chechnya, trained them to hunt by scent and tear out throats. She'd found bodies before, shredded so badly dental records were the only way to ID them. The barking grew louder, accompanied by shouting. Handler directing the animals, probably following her blood trail. She looked around the storage room, searching for an exit. One door, blocked by rubble. Windows set high in the walls, too small to climb through. The hole above, but she'd never make the climb one-handed. She was trapped. The barking was right outside now. Shadows moved past the windows. Someone shouted, "Here! Blood here!" in Arabic. Sarah raised the cig, targeting the door. Her hands were steady, but her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, a metronome counting down to capture or death. She'd saved the last round for herself, standard protocol. They didn't teach it officially, but everyone knew. The door handle rattled. She centered her sights, finger on the trigger, and then the floor collapsed beneath her feet. Sarah fell into darkness, the cig torn from her grip by impact. She hit hard, shoulder exploding in fresh agony, and rolled down what felt like concrete stairs. One step, two, three. She lost count after 5, just focused on protecting her head as she tumbled into the black. When she stopped, she lay gasping, pain singing through every nerve. Above, muffled by earth and concrete, she could hear the dogs barking, confused. The handlers shouting. They'd lost her scent. She'd fallen through a false floor into what could only be a bunker. An old one, judging by the smell, decades of stale air, undisturbed. Her NVGs were still attached to her helmet, miraculously intact. She pulled them down, activated them, and the darkness resolved into shapes. A corridor. Concrete walls, military-grade construction, doors leading off to side rooms. And dust. So much dust that her fall had left a clear trail, like snow disturbed by a body. But not just her trail. Boot prints, leading deeper into the bunker. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp, not yet softened by settling dust. American treads. She recognized the pattern, standard-issue combat boots, same kind she wore. Sarah retrieved her pistol, checking it for damage. The magazine had ejected during the fall, but she slapped it back in, racked the slide. Still functional. She listened, controlling her breathing despite the pain screaming from her shoulder. The bandage was soaked through, blood dripping onto the concrete floor. Above, the dogs had moved on. The handlers, too. She was alone in the dark with boot prints that shouldn't exist. And a light, she could see it now, faint but definite, coming from somewhere deeper in the facility. Her training said, stay put, call for extraction, wait for rescue. But her radio was dead, the building above was compromised, and enemy forces controlled the surface. Down here, at least, she had walls between her and the dogs. Sarah moved forward, following the boot prints. Her shadow stretched long and distorted in the NVG's green glow. The corridor extended maybe 50 feet before branching into a T-junction. The prints went right, so she went right. Pistol up, every sense screaming alert. The light grew brighter, not electric, too yellow. Chemlight? No, warmer than that. She rounded a corner and found the source. A Coleman lantern, battery-powered, sitting on a folding table in what looked like a command room. Maps on the walls, yellowed with age. A radio setup, old PRC-77 Vietnam-era stuff, cables snaking across the floor. And scattered on the table, MRE wrappers. Recent ones. Dates printed 2 weeks ago. Sarah's blood went colder than shock could account for. Someone had been living here. Recently. An American based on the MREs and boot prints. But why? This facility wasn't on any current operational map. She'd studied the briefing materials for this sector, and there was no mention of active bunkers. No warnings about unexplored Cold War infrastructure. She moved deeper, clearing rooms with mechanical precision despite her injury. Each space told the same story. Decades of abandonment interrupted by recent occupation. A sleeping area with a cot and sleeping bag. A latrine with chemical toilet still smelling of use. An armory with empty weapon racks. A few loose rounds scattered on the floor. 5.56 millimeter NATO. And then, in what must have been the facility's main operations center, she found the radio. Not the PRC-77. This was newer, a PRC-152, encrypted. Modern SINCGARS. It sat on a desk surrounded by paper notes, handwritten in English, detailing patrol schedules and grid coordinates. Her patrol schedule. Chen's patrol. The ambush hadn't been luck. Someone had been feeding intel from this bunker. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the radio, turned it on. It flickered to life, battery still good. She cycled through frequencies, searching for her unit's net, and found only static. But then, on the command frequency, all stations be advised, Overwatch is KIA, ground is combat ineffective. QRF is en route but estimate 20 mics. Negative on KIA, Sarah transmitted, her voice hoarse. Overwatch is alive and requesting immediate extract. Silence. Then a voice she recognized, Tom Reyes. Walker, Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. What's your position? I'm in a bunker. Coordinates unknown. I fell through. She paused, looking at the intel scattered across the desk. Tom, there's something down here. Someone's been using this place to track our patrols. Another pause, longer this time. When Reyes spoke again, his voice was careful. Copy that. Walker, listen to me very carefully. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not explore. Do not touch anything. QRF will extract you, but you need to stay put. Understand? Tom, whoever was here knew about Chen's patrol. I know. Stay put. That's an order. The transmission cut off. Sarah stood in the green glow of her NVGs, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, blood soaking through her bandage, and Tom Reyes's voice echoing in her ears with an edge she'd never heard before. Fear. The bunker was quiet in the way deep places are quiet, not silent but filled with the subtle sounds of earth settling, air moving through forgotten ducts, the distant drip of water through compromised seals. Sarah's shoulder had gone from screaming to a dull roar, shock starting to set in. She knew the signs: cold sweats, shaking hands, the feeling of being disconnected from her own body. She needed to move. Sitting still meant bleeding out or passing out, and neither option ended well. Tom had said stay put, but Tom also sounded scared. And in Sarah's experience, when Special Forces guys got scared, it meant you were standing in something worse than you understood. She swept her pistol across the operations center one more time, cataloging details. The maps on the wall weren't tactical maps, they were architectural. Blueprints. This bunker, she realized, was bigger than just a few rooms. The schematics showed multiple levels, corridors branching like arteries, rooms labeled with abbreviations she didn't recognize. Humint, SIGINT, detention. Detention. This wasn't a forward operating base. This was an interrogation facility. Sarah moved to the next room, following the boot prints. They led her down a corridor that sloped deeper, emergency lighting strips on the walls that hadn't worked in decades. Her NVGs picked up details her conscious mind tried to ignore. Scratch marks on the walls, low down, like someone had been dragged. Dark stains on the concrete that could have been rust, but probably weren't. The corridor opened into a larger space, a hub with 5 doors radiating outward. 4 were marked with stenciled numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th had no marking at all, just a heavy steel door with a wheel lock, the kind you'd see on a ship's bulkhead. The boot prints led to door 3. Sarah approached slowly, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she'd been in Mosul when they'd found the ISIS prison, had seen what happened in places designed to hurt people. Whatever this facility was, whoever had been here, she needed to know. She turned the handle. The door swung open with a rusty shriek. The smell hit her first. Copper and rot, unmistakable. She'd smelled it before, on the highway outside Kandahar, where an IED had turned a MRAP into a tomb. Blood. Old blood, but also fresh. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10, with a drain in the center of the floor. Chains hung from bolts in the ceiling. The walls were covered in something dark and flaking that she didn't want to examine too closely. And on the floor near the drain was a body. American. Male. Early 30s. ACUs with the patches ripped off, but she could see the tan line where they'd been. Dog tags around his neck. She read the name even though part of her knew she shouldn't. SGT Daniel Ortiz. The back of his head was gone. Exit wound. Executed. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard, back against the wall, trying to process. Ortiz. She knew that name. He'd gone missing 3 weeks ago during a supply run. Command had listed him as captured, possibly killed. They'd sent out search teams, but the sector was too hot, too compromised. He'd been here the whole time, in this bunker, alone. No, not alone. She looked at Ortiz's body again, forcing herself to examine it professionally. The wound was recent, less than 2 weeks old judging by decomposition. But he'd been missing for 3 weeks, which meant he'd been alive down here for at least a week before someone put a bullet in his brain. Sarah's hand went to her radio, but before she could key it, she heard a sound that stopped her heart. Footsteps, coming from deeper in the bunker. Not the quick steps of boots on concrete, slow, deliberate. Someone moving carefully, trying not to make noise but failing because the acoustics down here amplified everything. She killed her NVGs, plunging herself into darkness, controlled her breathing, raised the cig toward the doorway. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow passed the operations center, visible only as a darker shape against darkness, moving toward the hub, toward door 3, toward her. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. She could see nothing, hear only the steps and her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Whoever it was stopped just outside the door. Silence. Then a voice, low and male, speaking English with a Midwestern accent. "I know you're in there." Not a question, a statement. "Come out slow. Hands visible. You've got 5 seconds before I start shooting." Sarah's mind raced through options. She was wounded, low on ammunition, trapped in a room with one exit and a corpse. Whoever was outside could simply wait her out or toss a grenade in and be done with it. But they were talking, which meant they wanted her alive. Or they weren't sure what they were dealing with. "I'm U.S. Army," Sarah called out, keeping her voice steady. "Sergeant Sarah Walker, 3rd Infantry Division. I fell through during contact and I know who you are, saw you on the cameras." Cameras. Sarah's eyes flicked to the corners of the room, finding nothing in the darkness. But if the bunker had surveillance, then everything she'd done since falling through had been watched. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who's been down here a lot longer than you. Now come out before I change my mind about talking." Sarah made her decision. She reactivated her NVGs, got to her feet, and stepped through the doorway with her pistol lowered, but ready. If this went bad, she'd at least see it coming. The man in the corridor was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a hoodie, hiking boots, not military gear, despite the boot prints. His face was gaunt, beard unkempt, eyes shadowed by exhaustion or something worse. He held an M4 carbine pointed at her chest, finger on the trigger, professional grip. "Drop it," he said, nodding at her cig. "You first." A smile flickered across his face, humorless. "You're bleeding. You got maybe an hour before shock takes you, and that's being generous. Drop the pistol and I'll get you patched up. Keep it and you can bleed out while we argue." Sarah lowered the cig, set it on the floor, kicked it toward him. He made no move to pick it up, just kept the M4 trained on her. "Ortiz," she said, "the soldier in there. You kill him?" "No." The answer was immediate, convincing. "Found him like that. 2 weeks ago, give or take. Been trying to figure out who did it ever since." "But you've been here longer." 3 months. He saw her expression and nodded. "Yeah, long time to hide in a hole. But you don't understand what this place is yet. Once you do, you'll understand why I stayed." Sarah's vision swam, the edges going dark. She put a hand against the wall to steady herself. The man, she still didn't know his name, lowered the rifle slightly. "Come on," he said. "There's a med station on level 2. I'll fix that shoulder, and then we can talk about why Command sent you into a kill box." "They didn't." "Yes, they did. Your patrol was bait. Whole thing was designed to clear this sector so someone could come down here and sterilize the evidence. And you?" He gestured at her with the rifle. "You're a complication they didn't plan for." Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that there was no conspiracy, no cover-up, but she thought about the ambush, the perfectly coordinated timing, the intel scattered across the operations center desk. "Who are you?" she asked again. "Corporal James Brennan, Army Intelligence. Or I was, before they burned me." "Burned you how?" "Told everyone I deserted, flagged my file, made it so that if I ever surface, I get court-martialed, or worse." He started walking deeper into the bunker, glancing back to make sure she followed. "But the truth? I found out what this place was used for, and when I tried to report it, my own command turned on me." Sarah followed, legs unsteady, leaving a trail of blood drops on the concrete. "What was it used for?" Brennan stopped at a door marked Medical, opened it to reveal a surprisingly intact first aid station. Cabinets stocked with supplies that looked decades old but sealed in plastic. He set down his rifle, pulled out a trauma kit. "Sit," he ordered. She sat. As he cut away her bloody ACU top and began cleaning the wound, he spoke quietly. This facility was a black site, operated from 2003 to 2007, off-book, no official record. They brought in high-value targets from all over the Middle East, interrogated them, tortured them, if we're being honest. And when they were done, they made them disappear. Sarah hissed as he poured antiseptic into the wound. "How do you know this?" "Because I was sent here to destroy the evidence, burn the files, collapse the tunnels, erase it from history. Instead, I read the files, saw what they did, who they did it to." He applied a fresh bandage, wrapping it tight. Some of those detainees were innocent. Wrong place, wrong time. Picked up because an informant had a grudge or needed money. And Command knew. They knew and they didn't care. "So you stayed down here to, what, guard the evidence?" "To stay alive." Brennan met her eyes. "Because the same people who ran this facility are still in command, and they will kill anyone who threatens to expose what happened. Ortiz found out the hard way." Sarah's head spun, and not just from blood loss. "Tom Reyes, you know that name?" Brennan's expression hardened. "Yeah, I know it. He was Special Forces, ran logistics. He told me to stay put, sounded scared when I mentioned the intel I found." "Reyes didn't run logistics," Brennan said. "He ran this facility. He was the OIC when they were torturing prisoners. And if he knows you're down here, knows what you've seen—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah looked at the bunker around her, at the man who'd been hiding for 3 months, at the body in the room down the hall. "The QRF," she said slowly. "Tom said they were 20 minutes out." "They're not coming to rescue you," Brennan confirmed. "They're coming to tie up loose ends." Sarah's mind refused to accept it. Tom Reyes, the man who'd shared coffee with her in the DFAC, who'd told stories about his kids back in Arizona, who'd shown her photos of his grandchildren, was responsible for torture, for murder. But the evidence surrounded her. The bunker, the body, Brennan's haunted eyes. "Show me," she said. "The files. Show me proof." Brennan hesitated, then nodded. He led her through corridors that grew more labyrinthine with each turn, down a staircase to what he'd called Level 2. The air here was colder, damper. The emergency lighting strips were completely dead, leaving only the green glow of her NVGs and the flashlight Brennan carried. They reached a room marked Archives. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, most of them empty, drawers pulled open and ransacked. But in the back corner, Brennan had stacked files he'd pulled from the wreckage. Dozens of folders, some water-damaged, all stamped classified. He handed her one. "Start with that." Sarah opened it. The first page was a detention order, dated March 2006. Subject: Khalid Al-Mashad, male, age 34, suspected Al-Qaeda facilitator. Detained at Forward Operating Base, Seraph. She'd never heard of Seraph, and that was the point. The name was scrubbed from official records. Authorization signature: Major Thomas Reyes. The next pages were interrogation logs. Dates, times, methods. The clinical language made it worse somehow. Enhanced interrogation technique applied. Subject showed resistance. Waterboarding session terminated due to medical distress. And then, on the final page, subject expired during interrogation. Remains disposed of per protocol. Sarah looked up. They killed him. Killed him and buried him somewhere no one would find. Al-Mashad wasn't Al-Qaeda. He was a school teacher who'd criticized the occupation to a journalist. Someone wanted him silenced, and Reyes made it happen. There were more files, dozens more. Different names, different charges, same outcome. Detention, interrogation, death. And on every authorization form, the same signature. Sarah's hands shook. Why didn't you go public? Take this to the media, to Congress, to... I tried. Brennan's voice was flat. Sent encrypted files to 3 different journalists. All 3 died in accidents within a month. Car crash. Mugging gone wrong. Heart attack at 43 years old. He laughed bitterly. That's when I realized how deep this goes. It's not just Reyes. He's got cover from people higher up. Colonels, maybe generals. People who need this place to stay buried. Sarah set down the file, her stomach churning. Ortiz, did he try to go public too? No, Ortiz was smarter than that. He was going to leak it anonymously, just dump everything on WikiLeaks and disappear. But someone got to him first. Brennan's jaw tightened. I found him in that room. He'd been beaten. Not for information. They already knew what he had. They beat him for punishment. And then they executed him. Who? I don't know. I was on level 3 when I heard the gunshot. By the time I got to him, whoever did it was gone. Went out through the eastern tunnel, collapsed it behind them. I've been stuck down here since, waiting for a chance to escape that wouldn't get me killed. Sarah leaned against the filing cabinet, trying to process. The ambush today, you said my patrol was bait. They needed to clear the sector. Probably got word that someone was sniffing around, asking questions about the bunker. So they orchestrated an attack, lured your patrol into a kill box, and now they've got an excuse to lock down the whole area. Brennan checked his watch. And that QRF? They're not bringing medics and extraction. They're bringing a demo team. They're going to collapse this place with us in it and call it a combat loss. You don't know that? Yes, I do, because I've been monitoring their comms. He pulled out a small radio, military grade but modified. They think their encryption is secure, but if you know the old codes, and I do, you can still listen in. I heard the order 30 minutes ago. Seal the bunker. No survivors. Sarah felt the walls closing in. Her shoulder throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Blood still seeped through the fresh bandage. She was running on adrenaline and stubbornness, both of which had limits. There has to be a way out, she said. There is. One. Brennan moved to a map tacked on the wall, shining his flashlight on it. Emergency exit, northeast corner of level 3, leads to a culvert about half a click from here. Opens into the old drainage system. We can use that to get outside the perimeter, but we have to move now. They'll be here in 15 minutes, and once they blow the charges, the whole structure collapses. Sarah looked at the files stacked around them. Evidence of war crimes. Proof that could bring down careers, maybe administrations. We take these with us. No time. Too heavy. I've already digitized the most damning ones. He pulled a thumb drive from his pocket. Everything on here. Names, dates, photos. It's enough. Then let's move. But as they left the archives, Sarah's radio crackled to life. Tom Reyes's voice, friendly and concerned. Walker, you still with me? QRF is 2 mics out. Hold tight, we're coming to get you. Brennan and Sarah locked eyes. He knows, she whispered. He's always known, Brennan replied. Now he's coming to make sure we never leave. And somewhere above them, the sound of boots on concrete echoed through the bunker like distant thunder. Not rescuers, executioners. They moved fast, Brennan leading with the M4 up, Sarah following with her recovered SIG. Her shoulder screamed with every step, but adrenaline kept her moving. The corridors of Level 2 twisted like intestines, and without Brennan's knowledge of the layout, she'd have been lost in minutes. Above them, the footsteps grew louder. Multiple sets now. The QRF had arrived, but they weren't calling out, weren't announcing themselves as friendlies. They were hunting. This way, Brennan pulled her into a side passage, killing his flashlight. They pressed against the wall as boots thundered overhead, close enough that dust sifted down from the ceiling. Sarah counted at least 6 men, maybe more. Too many to fight, even if she wasn't bleeding and operating on one arm. The footsteps passed. Brennan waited 30 seconds, then moved again, taking them deeper into the bunker's guts. They descended another staircase, this one narrow and steep, to Level 3. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. The walls here were different. Older concrete, stained with efflorescence where groundwater had leached through over decades. The air smelled of mold and something chemical that Sarah couldn't identify. Her NVGs picked up details. Rooms with hospital beds bolted to the floor, IV stands still hanging from ceiling mounts, restraints attached to bed frames. "What is this?" she whispered. "Medical wing, where they kept detainees alive between interrogation sessions." Brennan didn't slow down, didn't look at the rooms. He'd seen it all before, lived with it for 3 months. Keep moving. They passed a room with a steel examination table, drains in the floor, surgical lights overhead. Sarah's stomach turned. She'd read about black sites in intelligence briefings, but reading was different from standing in one, breathing air that still carried the weight of what had happened here. A radio squawked behind them. Close. Too close. "Clear through Level 2, no contact, moving to 3. Brennan grabbed Sarah's arm, pulled her into a storage room. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with medical supplies that had long since expired. Bottles of saline solution, boxes of surgical gloves, packages of gauze turned yellow with age. They hid behind a metal shelving unit as flashlight beams swept the corridor outside. "Command, this is Cerberus 1. Level 3 is extensive. Request additional manpower for sweep." The response was Tom Reyes's voice, and hearing it now, knowing what Sarah knew, made her skin crawl. "Negative, Cerberus 1. You have your orders. Find them and neutralize. No prisoners." No prisoners. The words hung in the stale air like a death sentence. Sarah checked her SIG. 17 rounds. Brennan had maybe 30 in his M4, plus whatever spare mags he carried. Against 6 or more professional soldiers with full combat load and support from command, the odds were impossible. But she'd been in Mosul when her firebase got overrun, had held a rooftop for 8 hours with nothing but her rifle and a pile of dead magazines. Impossible just meant you had to be smarter, meaner, and willing to do things the other side wasn't. "How far to the exit?" she whispered. "Northeast corner, maybe 200 meters, but we have to go through the detention block to get there." Brennan's face was grim. That's where the worst stuff happened, where they kept the ones who weren't supposed to exist. Sarah understood. Ghost detainees, people who'd been erased from every record, whose families were told they'd never been captured, who died in rooms designed to muffle screams. "Can we go around?" "Not without backtracking through areas they've already cleared. Our only shot is straight through." The flashlight beams moved away, searching deeper into Level 3. Brennan waited until the footsteps faded, then motioned for Sarah to follow. They slipped back into the corridor, moving in the opposite direction of the search team. The bunker's geometry worked in their favor. The QRF was sweeping methodically, room by room, assuming their targets were hiding. They weren't expecting someone to flank them, to use the bunker's maze-like structure as a weapon. Brennan led her through a series of turns that Sarah tried to memorize but couldn't. Left, right, straight, down a short ramp, through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The designation was almost funny now. Everything down here was authorized only, which meant nothing was. They emerged into a wider corridor, this one lined with heavy doors. Each door had a small window at eye level, reinforced glass. Detention cells. Sarah looked through the first window and wished she hadn't. The cell was maybe 8 by 10 feet, concrete floor, no furniture except a metal ring bolted to the wall. Scratch marks covered the walls, some deep enough to expose rebar. And written in what looked like dried blood, Arabic script that she couldn't read, but understood instinctively as a prayer or a plea. "Don't look," Brennan said quietly. "It doesn't help." But Sarah couldn't stop. She moved to the next window, the next cell. Each one told a story of suffering. Dried blood, broken fingernails embedded in cracks, words carved into concrete with pieces of metal. And in one cell, a message in English. "Tell my family I died brave." "How many?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Detained here? Hundreds. Over the 4 years it operated, how many died?" Brennan shook his head. "The files I found documented 63 deaths, but there were gaps in the records, months where nothing was logged. The real number could be twice that." Sarah felt rage building beneath the shock and pain. This wasn't war. This wasn't even interrogation. This was a factory designed to break human beings, operated by her own military, authorized by officers who still wore the uniform. And Tom Reyes had run it. A sound stopped her cold. Not footsteps, something else. A scraping noise, rhythmic, coming from one of the cells ahead. Brennan heard it too. He raised his M4, approaching the cell slowly. Sarah followed, her cig up, expecting, she didn't know what. A rat, pipes expanding. Anything but what she saw when she looked through the window. A man, alive, sitting in the corner of the cell, rocking back and forth, scraping something against the floor. He was emaciated, beard matted, wearing the remnants of civilian clothes that might have once been a suit. "Jesus Christ," Brennan breathed. "There's someone still here." Sarah tried the door. Locked. Heavy deadbolt. She looked for a key, a control panel, anything. Brennan was already moving to a wall-mounted box, breaking it open to reveal manual override switches. He threw one, and the deadbolt clunked open. The smell that rolled out was overwhelming. Human waste, infection, unwashed body. The man in the corner didn't look up, just kept scraping. Sarah saw what he was using, a piece of his own tooth, broken off, using it to carve into the concrete floor. She approached slowly, hands visible, voice soft. Hey, it's okay. We're American military. We're here to help." The man's head snapped up. His eyes were wild, unfocused. "American?" The word came out cracked, barely intelligible. You're American?" "Yes, we're getting you out of here. Can you walk?" He tried to stand and collapsed immediately. His legs, Sarah saw, were atrophied. How long had he been in here? Weeks? Months? Brennan slung his rifle, moved to help. Together they got the man to his feet, draping his arms over their shoulders. He weighed almost nothing, all bone and papery skin. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Rasheed. Rasheed Al-Hakim. I was," he struggled for words. "Translator. I worked for American forces, in Fallujah. They said I was spy. They brought me here." Sarah's blood went cold. "When?" "I don't. Time is..." Rasheed's eyes lost focus. "The guards stopped coming. No food, no water. I thought I would die here." "The guards stopped coming 3 months ago," Brennan said quietly, "when the facility was officially decommissioned. They just left him." left him to die slowly in the dark, forgotten. Sarah felt her rage crystallize into something sharp and focused. This wasn't just about exposing crimes. This was about making sure it never happened again. But they had to. Brennan kept checking over his shoulder, M4 in one hand, supporting Rasheed with the other. The detention block ended at a heavy blast door, partially open. Beyond it, a tunnel extended into darkness, shored up with timber supports that looked World War II vintage. This was older than the bunker, Sarah realized. Something the bunker had been built around, incorporating existing infrastructure into its design. They were 50 feet into the tunnel when the radio on Brennan's belt squawked. Cerberus 1, we've got an open cell in Detention Block D. Someone's been here recently. Copy, tighten the perimeter. They're heading for the northeast exit. Brennan and Sarah exchanged looks. They'd been made. Go, Brennan said, pushing Rasheed towards Sarah. I'll hold them here. That's suicide. It's a bottleneck. One man with a rifle can hold this tunnel for 5 minutes, maybe 10. That's enough time for you to get Rasheed out and clear the perimeter. Sarah shook her head. I don't leave people behind, remember? You're not leaving me behind. You're completing the mission. He pressed the thumb drive into her hand. Get this out. Get it to someone who can actually do something with it. That's worth more than both our lives. Sarah wanted to argue, but tactical reality was crushing. She couldn't carry Rasheed alone, couldn't fight effectively with one arm, couldn't do anything but what Brennan was telling her to do. She took the thumb drive. 5 minutes, then I'm coming back for you. Don't. Just run. Brennan smiled, and for a moment, the haunted look left his eyes. Tell them what happened here. Make sure everyone knows. He turned before she could respond, setting up position behind a support beam, M4 trained back toward the blast door. Sarah pulled Rasheed deeper into the tunnel, each step a fight against exhaustion and pain, and the knowledge that she was leaving someone behind after all. Behind her, gunfire erupted. The sound was deafening in the confined space, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness. She heard Brennan's M4 firing in controlled bursts, heard return fire, heard someone scream. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just kept moving, dragging Rasheed forward as the tunnel sloped upward, toward fresh air and daylight, and a world that had forgotten about the hell buried beneath it. The tunnel was endless. Sarah's lungs burned, her shoulder was on fire, and Rasheed was dead weight in her grip. Behind them, the gunfight continued, short bursts from Brennan's M4, longer automatic fire from multiple weapons. The QRF was pushing hard, and Brennan was giving ground because he had to. Sarah found reserve she didn't know she had. Probably shock, probably her body cannibalizing itself for energy, but she moved faster, half running through the dark with Rasheed stumbling beside her. The tunnel began to change. The timber supports gave way to natural rock, then to modern concrete again. An access shaft, maybe, connecting the bunker to the city's old drainage system. She saw light ahead. Not electric, natural daylight filtering through a grate. The emergency exit. Rasheed saw it too. Light, he whispered. I see light. Sarah pushed harder. 50 feet, 40, 30. The grate was set in the ceiling, a ladder leading up to it. She could see the street above through the bars, could smell fresh air mixing with the bunker's stale breath. Behind them, the gunfire stopped. Sarah froze, listening. Nothing. No more shots, no voices. Just silence, which was worse than noise because silence meant someone had won, and she didn't know who. She couldn't think about it, couldn't stop now. She got Rasheed to the ladder. Climb, can you climb? He nodded, grabbing the rungs with shaking hands. His ascent was pathetic, each rung a monumental effort, but he climbed. Sarah stayed below him, ready to catch him if he fell, her cig tucked into her waistband because she needed both hands free. Rasheed reached the grate, pushed. It didn't move. Locked, he said, voice breaking. Sarah climbed up beside him, examined the grate. Not locked. rusted shut. Decades of corrosion had welded it to the frame. She braced her good shoulder against it, pushed with everything she had. The metal groaned, but held. "Together," she said. "On three. 1, 2, 3. They pushed. Sarah felt something tear in her wounded shoulder, felt blood gush hot and fresh, felt the world tilt sideways. But the grate moved. Just an inch, but it moved. Again. Push. The grate shrieked, metal on metal, and shifted another few inches. A third time. Sarah's vision went dark at the edges, her body screaming that it had nothing left. But she pushed anyway, and this time the grate swung open, clanging against the street above. Daylight poured down. Real daylight. Sarah had never seen anything so beautiful. "Go," she told Rasheed. "Up. Now." He climbed out, collapsing onto the street above. Sarah followed, her arms barely able to pull her weight. She got her head above ground, saw they'd emerged in an alley between ruined buildings. The street beyond was empty, civilians still avoiding the sector probably. She was halfway out when hands grabbed her and pulled. Not Rasheed's hands. These were strong, gloved, professional. Sarah's instincts kicked in and she twisted, reaching for her cig, but her body betrayed her. Too slow, too weak. The world spun as someone hauled her fully onto the street and slammed her down on her back. She looked up into the barrel of an M4. But the face behind it wasn't QRF. It was a woman, maybe 35, wearing civilian clothes and a tactical vest. Two more people stood behind her. A man and another woman, similarly dressed, all armed. "Don't move," the first woman said. Her accent was American, East Coast. "Sarah Walker?" Sarah could only nod, her voice gone. The woman lowered her weapon slightly. "My name is Jennifer Hale. I'm a journalist with the Washington Post. James Brennan sent us files 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to verify them, but..." She glanced at the bunker entrance, then back at Sarah. "Is it real? Is all of it real?" Sarah found her voice. "Every word. And there's more. Evidence. On a thumb drive." She fumbled for it with numb fingers, held it up. Hale took it like it was made of gold. "Jesus, we need to get you medical attention. We've got a vehicle 3 blocks west." "Brennan," Sarah interrupted. "James Brennan. He's still down there. The QRF cornered him. We have to..." An explosion cut her off. The ground shook, the bunker entrance belching dust and smoke. Sarah felt it through the concrete, felt the tunnels collapsing, felt hundreds of tons of earth and stone sealing the facility forever, sealing Brennan in with it. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, no, no." Hale's partner pulled her to her feet. "We need to go. Now. They'll have this area locked down in minutes." But Sarah couldn't move, couldn't look away from the smoking hole where the entrance had been. Brennan was gone. Not KIA in combat, not MIA, but erased, buried in the same tomb as the crimes he'd tried to expose. "We'll make it count," Hale said quietly, understanding. "His sacrifice. We'll make sure everyone knows. I promise you." Sarah let them lead her away, supporting her between them. Rasheed stumbled after, still confused, still processing that he was free. They moved through alleys, avoiding main streets, working their way toward the journalist's vehicle. Behind them, sirens wailed. The military response was coming, the cordon tightening. But they'd made it. They were alive. And they had the evidence. Sarah looked down at her hands, caked with dust and blood. She'd gone into this mission as a sniper, a soldier doing her job. She was coming out as something else, a witness, a survivor. Someone who knew too much and would spend the rest of her life wondering if the truth had been worth the cost. The journalist's vehicle was a beat-up Toyota Hilux with press credentials taped to the windshield. Credentials that, Sarah suspected, wouldn't mean much if the QRF caught them. They drove fast through back streets, the city blurring past, until they reached a safe house on the edge of the sector. It was a 2-story building that had somehow survived the fighting intact. Inside, it looked like a field office. Laptops, satellite equipment, stacks of documents, a wall covered in photographs and notes connected by string like a murder board. Hale's team worked with practiced efficiency. The man, he introduced himself as David Chen, photographer, began documenting Sarah's injuries with a camera, getting shots of her bloody shoulder, her torn uniform, her thousand-yard stare. The other woman, Dr. Lisa Martinez, turned out to be a medic. She sat Sarah down and began properly treating the shoulder wound. "You're lucky," Martinez said, cutting away the field dressing. "Another inch to the left, and this would have hit the subclavian artery. You'd have bled out in minutes." Sarah didn't feel lucky. She felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else. Hale sat across from her, laptop open, the thumb drive already inserted. "I need you to walk me through everything. Start from when you fell into the bunker." Sarah talked. The words came out mechanical at first, just facts and chronology. But as she went deeper, describing the operations center, the detention cells, Rasheed locked away and forgotten, emotion bled through. By the time she got to Brennan's last stand, her voice was shaking. "He said to make sure everyone knows," she finished. That was his last order. Hale was typing furiously, her face hard with concentration. "They will. We've been building this story for months, but we couldn't publish without corroboration. The files Brennan sent were damning, but we needed someone on the record, a witness. I'll testify, whatever you need." "Good, because the people involved in this have a lot of power. They'll come after you. After all of us, we need to be ready." David had finished photographing Sarah and moved to Rasheed, who sat in the corner, still processing his freedom. The translator was answering questions in halting English, describing his detention, the interrogations, the moment the guards simply stopped coming. "3 months, Rasheed said. 3 months I was alone. I prayed. I carved the 99 names of Allah into the floor. I thought it was test from God to see if I would keep faith." "You did," Sarah told him. "You survived. That takes more faith than most people will ever need." Martinez finished bandaging Sarah's shoulder, gave her antibiotics and pain medication. "You've lost a lot of blood. Ideally, you'd be in a hospital, getting a transfusion, but I understand why that's not an option." "How long before the story runs?" Sarah asked Hale. "We're fast-tracking it. With this new evidence, we could have something published within 48 hours. But," she hesitated, "you understand what happens then? Once this is public, there's no going back. Your career is over. You'll be labeled a traitor by some, a hero by others. You'll spend years in depositions and hearings. They might even try to prosecute you for breaking classification." Sarah thought about Tom Reyes, about his friendly smile in the DFAC, his photos of grandchildren, about the authorization forms with his signature, the detention cells, the body of Daniel Ortiz with the back of his head blown out. "I don't care," she said. "This has to end, whatever it costs." Hale nodded, respect in her eyes. "Okay, then let's burn it all down." But before they could continue, Chen called out from his position by the window. "We've got movement. Military vehicles 2 blocks north." Everyone froze. Hale closed her laptop, began packing equipment. Martinez grabbed her med bag. Sarah reached for her cig, checked the magazine out of habit, even though she was in no condition to fight. "They found us," Chen said. "Multiple Humvees, maybe a platoon's worth of infantry. They're setting up a perimeter." Sarah's mind raced. The QRF from the bunker must have reported survivors escaping, and someone in command, Tom Reyes probably, had put the pieces together. Americans helping a wounded soldier wouldn't hide, unless that soldier had something to hide. "Back door?" Sarah asked. "Leads to an alley that's probably already covered," Hale said. She looked at her team, at Sarah, at Rasheed, making calculations. "We need to split up. Sarah, Rasheed, you come with me. Chen, Martinez, You take the equipment and the backup drives. Different routes, different safe houses. We reconvene at the embassy if we can, or we go dark and publish remotely if we can't. They'll arrest us, Martinez pointed out. Then we make sure the story's already out before they can. Hale pulled out a satellite phone, began typing a message. I'm sending the files to our editor now. Encrypted, direct upload. If we don't make it out, the story still runs. Sarah watched her work, this journalist who'd probably never fired a weapon, but showed the same calm under pressure as any soldier Sarah had served with. Different kind of courage, maybe, but courage nonetheless. Done, Hale said. Files are uploaded. Now we run. They split into two groups. Chen and Martinez went through the back, carrying the laptops and hard drives. Hale led Sarah and Rasheed to a side exit that opened onto a narrow service alley. The plan was simple: work their way east, away from the military cordon, until they could reach the embassy district. Simple, but not easy. The alley was cluttered with debris, forcing them to climb over rubble and squeeze through tight spaces. Sarah's shoulder protested every movement, but she pushed through it. Rasheed was worse. His atrophied legs could barely support him, and they had to stop every few dozen meters to let him catch his breath. Behind them they heard shouts in English, orders being given. The cordon was tightening. This way, Hale said, pulling them into a building through a broken window. They found themselves in what used to be a restaurant, tables still set, kitchen equipment rusted and covered in dust. They moved through to the front, checking the street. Clear, for now. They crossed quickly, staying low, and entered another building across the street. This one was more damaged, floors partially collapsed, walls showing rebar like exposed bones. But it provided cover, and cover was life. Sarah's radio, still on her vest, somehow still functional, crackled. Tom Reyes's voice, calm and paternal. Walker, I know you're out there. I know you're scared, but you need to come in. Whatever Brennan told you, whatever you think you know, it's more complicated than that. Sarah almost responded, almost keyed the mic and told him exactly what she thought of his complications. But Hale put a hand on her arm, shook her head. Don't engage. Don't give away your position. You're wounded, Reyes continued. You need medical attention. Turn yourself in, and I promise you'll be treated fairly. We'll debrief, we'll sort this out, and you can go home. Back to your family, back to your life. It was a good pitch, reasonable, caring, the kind of thing a mentor would say to a soldier who'd gotten in over her head. Except Sarah had seen the files, had seen the cells, had seen Ortiz's body in Brennan's last stand. She reached for the radio, switched it off. Whatever Tom wanted to say, she didn't need to hear. They kept moving, building to building, always eastward. The city was a maze of ruins, and Hale navigated it with surprising skill. Must have been embedded here for months, Sarah thought, learning the terrain the way soldiers did. They were 3 blocks from the embassy district when Rasheed collapsed. Can't, he gasped. Can't go further. Leave me, please. Not happening, Sarah said. She got him upright, supporting him with her good arm. We're almost there, just a little further. But even as she said it, she heard engines, heavy ones, Humvees converging on their position from multiple directions. They'd been tracked somehow, thermal imaging maybe, or drones overhead spotting their movement. Hale checked her phone. No signal. The military was jamming communications, keeping them isolated. There, Sarah pointed, a building ahead, larger than the others. 5 stories, more intact than most. We can hole up, make them come to us. They'll just wait us out or call in an airstrike. Not on the embassy district. Too much risk of collateral damage. Sarah was already moving toward the building. Buy us time until we can signal the embassy, get their attention. They made it inside just as the first Humvee rounded the corner. The building was an old office complex, cubicles still set up, computers on desks, like everyone had just walked away one day and never came back. Sarah got Rasheed into a corner, checked her SIG. 13 rounds left. Not enough for a prolonged firefight, but enough to make whoever came through the door regret it. Hale was on her phone, trying different signals, different apps. If I can get even a brief connection, I can ping our location to the embassy, to our bureau. Someone will know where we are. Outside, the Humvee stopped. Doors opened. Boots hit pavement. Sarah counted the sounds. 8 soldiers, maybe 10. Professional movement, coordinated. This wasn't a police action. This was a kill team. A loudspeaker crackled to life. Attention inside the building. You are in violation of military curfew and suspected of espionage. Exit with your hands visible, and you will not be harmed. Sarah almost laughed. Espionage. They were really going with that. We don't have to do this, the voice continued, and Sarah recognized it now. Not Tom Reyes, but someone younger. Captain Nathan Cross, one of Reyes's subordinates. She'd met him once at a briefing, remembered thinking he had dead eyes despite his smile. Come out peacefully. No one else has to die today. Hale looked at Sarah. Your call. You're the soldier. Sarah thought about her options. Surrender meant arrest, prosecution, probably disappearing into military custody while the story got buried. Fighting meant death, but at least she'd die free. And then her radio crackled again. Not Reyes this time, and not Cross. A new voice, female, professional. Sergeant Walker, this is Colonel Amanda Price, JAG Corps. I'm currently en route to your position with Embassy Security. Hold your position and do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Help is coming. Sarah and Hale exchanged looks. This was new. How do we know it's real? Hale whispered. They didn't. It could be a trick, a way to keep them passive while the kill team moved in. But it could also be legitimate. Someone in the chain of command who wasn't dirty, who'd heard about an incident and was trying to save lives. Sarah made her decision. She keyed her radio, broadcasting on all military frequencies. This is Sergeant Sarah Walker. I am currently detained by hostile forces claiming to be U.S. military. I have evidence of war crimes committed by American personnel. I am requesting immediate assistance and protection under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. She put everything into the transmission. Her name, her rank, her location. Made it official. Made it impossible to disappear quietly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then in the distance, she heard different sirens. Not military, civilian. Embassy security maybe, or local police. And above it all, the distinctive thump of a helicopter. Captain Cross's voice came back on the loudspeaker, but the confidence was gone. All units hold position. We have additional elements approaching. Await further orders. Sarah smiled grimly. Someone had just pulled rank, and Cross knew it. The helicopter was a Black Hawk with UN markings, and it set down in the street with enough rotor wash to blow dust through every broken window. Sarah watched from her position as embassy security vehicles arrived, actual diplomats with actual authority, and suddenly Captain Cross and his team were the ones being questioned. Colonel Price stepped out of the Black Hawk like she owned the airspace. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back tight, wearing dress uniform with enough ribbons to fill her chest. JAG Corps, Sarah had said, which meant legal authority. Price walked straight to Cross, and even from a distance, Sarah could see him deflating. It's over, Hale said quietly. They can't disappear us now. Too many witnesses. Sarah wasn't so sure. People with the kind of power that had run a black site for 4 years didn't give up easily. But for now, they'd want a reprieve. Price entered the building with 2 security officers, hands visible, moving slowly, professional courtesy. Sergeant Walker? Here. Sarah stood, kept her hands where they could be seen. Price approached, took in Sarah's condition with a glance. You look like hell, Sergeant. Been a long day, ma'am. I imagine it has. I'm Colonel Amanda Price, Judge Advocate General. I've been briefed on some very serious allegations regarding U.S. military personnel and a classified facility. I need you to come with me. You'll be given medical treatment, placed in protective custody, and debriefed by investigators from my office. Not military investigators, no. JAG Corps, operating independently. You have my word that this will be handled appropriately. Sarah wanted to believe her, but trust was a commodity she'd run out of hours ago. What about them? She indicated Hale and Rasheed. The journalists will be escorted to the embassy and allowed to contact their bureau. The detainee, Price looked at Rasheed, something pained crossing her face. We'll get him medical care and figure out his status. If what you've told me is accurate, the United States government owes him a debt we can never repay. Hale was already on her phone, signal restored now that the jamming had stopped. My editor confirms they've received the files. Story's going through legal review now. We'll have something published within 24 hours. Price's jaw tightened. That's going to complicate things. Good, Sarah said. It should be complicated. People should know. The colonel studied her for a long moment. You understand what you've started? The investigations, the hearings, the congressional inquiries. This will consume years of your life. I understand. And you're prepared for that? Sarah thought about Brennan, buried in the bunker. About Ortiz, executed for trying to tell the truth. About Rasheed, left to die alone in the dark. About the 63 documented deaths and the unknown number beyond that. I'm prepared, she said. Price nodded. Then let's get you out of here. They walked out of the building together, Sarah leaning on a security officer for support. The street was full of vehicles now, embassy security, military police, even a few local police who'd been called in. Captain Cross and his team were being detained, their weapons confiscated, the whole operation falling apart. And standing apart from everyone else, watching with an unreadable expression, was Tom Reyes. Sarah stopped. She should have kept walking, should have gotten in the helicopter and never looked back. But she couldn't. She walked toward him, each step deliberate, until they stood face to face. Sarah, his voice was quiet, almost sad. You don't understand what you've done. I understand perfectly. I exposed war criminals, starting with you. Those men we detained were terrorists. They had blood on their hands, American blood. Some of them maybe, but not all. Not Rasheed, not the others whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She leaned in close, lowering her voice. And even if they were all guilty, we don't torture. We don't execute. We're supposed to be better than that. Reyes's mask slipped for just a moment, showing something underneath, not guilt, but exhaustion. The look of a man who'd carried secrets too long. You're young. You still think there are good guys and bad guys. Wait until you've been doing this for 30 years. Wait until you've seen what I've seen. Then tell me about being better. I've seen enough, Sarah said. I've seen what you built, what you did, and I've seen the people you destroyed. She stepped back. I hope it was worth it. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. She didn't know if he'd be arrested, if he'd face trial, if any of this would actually lead to justice. The system protected its own, especially at his level. But at least people would know. The truth would be out there, impossible to bury completely. Colonel Price was waiting by the helicopter. We need to go. There are still elements in play here who might try something stupid. Sarah climbed aboard, Martinez and one of Price's medics immediately attending to her shoulder. As the Black Hawk lifted off, she looked down at the ruined city, at the bunker entrance still smoking from the demolition charges, at the sector where dozens, maybe hundreds, had died in secret. The facility was gone, buried forever. But the memory would live on, in files and testimony, in the story Hale would publish, in the nightmares Sarah knew she'd carry for the rest of her life. Rasheed sat across from her, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the city falling away beneath him. What happens now? He asked. Now? Sarah considered the question. Now we make sure it never happens again. It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, but it was the only one she had left to give. The flight to the embassy took 15 minutes. They landed on the roof, where a full medical team was waiting. Sarah was transferred to a gurney despite her protests, wheeled into a proper trauma bay. The doctors worked efficiently, IV for fluids, blood transfusion, imaging on her shoulder to assess the damage. "You're lucky," one of them said, echoing Martinez's earlier assessment. "No permanent nerve damage. Should heal clean with physical therapy." Lucky. Sarah was tired of hearing that word. Lucky wasn't watching your spotter die in a building collapse. Lucky wasn't finding a fellow soldier executed in a black site. Lucky sure as hell wasn't spending 3 months alone in a bunker, protecting evidence that might get you killed. But she was alive, and Brennan wasn't, so she kept her mouth shut and let them work. Colonel Price visited her in recovery, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "The JAG investigation is already underway. We've secured the thumb drive and begun cross-referencing the files with official records, or rather, the absence of official records. The facility you described doesn't appear in any database. That's the point of a black site." "Indeed, but it makes prosecution difficult. Without documentation, we're relying on testimony and recovered evidence. Your testimony, primarily." Sarah understood what she wasn't saying. A case built on one soldier's word against high-ranking officers would be fragile. Reyes and whoever else was involved would have lawyers, would have allies in the Pentagon, would have every reason to paint Sarah as unreliable or mentally unstable. What about Rasheed? He can testify to being detained. He's an Iraqi national with no documentation proving he was ever detained. His testimony would be valuable, but not sufficient on its own. Price pulled out a tablet, showed Sarah a news alert. The Post published 30 minutes ago. Front page. "Secret prison, U.S. military-operated torture facility in Iraq." It's everywhere now. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. They can't bury it. Sarah read the article's opening paragraphs. Hale had written it well, combining Brennan's documentation with Sarah's testimony and Rasheed's account. The details were damning. Names, dates, specific interrogation techniques, and prominently featured Major Thomas Reyes, identified as the facility's commanding officer. "How's he responding?" Sarah asked. "Lawyered up immediately. Released a statement denying all allegations, claiming the facility was a legitimate detention center operating under proper authority. He's got support from some elements in the Defense Department." "Of course he does." Price set down the tablet. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah?" "Sure. You did the right thing. I want you to know that. But the right thing doesn't always lead to justice. These investigations can take years. Cases can fall apart on technicalities. People with power have ways of protecting themselves." "So what are you saying? I risked everything for nothing." "No, I'm saying prepare yourself for a long fight, and for the possibility that the legal outcome might not match the moral victory you've already won." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settling over her. She thought exposing the truth would be enough. But truth without consequences was just information. And information could be managed, spun, buried under layers of bureaucracy and classified procedures. "What about Brennan?" she asked. "His body, he deserves to be recovered, given a proper burial." "The bunkers collapsed. It would take major excavation, and the area is still too unstable." "I'm sorry." So Brennan would stay there, entombed with the secrets he died protecting. It seemed wrong. But Sarah was learning that a lot of things in this story were wrong, and very few of them could be made right. A knock on the door interrupted them. One of Price's assistants stuck his head in. "Ma'am, we've got a situation. Major Reyes is here. He's demanding to speak with Sergeant Walker." Sarah's hand went instinctively to where her sidearm should be, found only a hospital gown. "I'm not talking to him." "You don't have to," Price assured her. "I'll have him removed from the premises." "Wait," Sarah reconsidered. Part of her wanted nothing to do with Reyes. But another part, the part that had spent the day uncovering his crimes, wanted to look him in the eye one more time. Wanted to see if there was any guilt there, any recognition of what he'd done. Let him in. 5 minutes. Price looked doubtful. Are you sure? Yeah, but stay in the room. Price nodded to her assistant, who left and returned moments later with Tom Reyes. He looked older than he had that morning, lines deeper, shoulders hunched. He'd aged a decade in a day. Sarah. He stopped at the foot of her bed. How are you feeling? How do you think? He glanced at Price, then back to Sarah. Could we speak privately? No, both women said in unison. Reyes sighed. Fine, I came to explain. You deserve that much. I don't want your explanations. I want you to admit what you did. What I did was follow orders. What I did was protect American lives. Those men we detained. Don't. Sarah's voice was sharp. Don't hide behind following orders or protecting lives. You tortured people. You killed people. You left them in cells to die alone. That's not protection. That's murder. Reyes's jaw tightened. You weren't there in 2005. You didn't see what they were doing to our soldiers. IEDs everywhere. Ambushes. Beheadings posted online. We needed intelligence, and we needed it fast. The facility provided that. At what cost? A cost I was willing to pay. He leaned forward intense. You think I enjoyed it? You think I wanted to run that place? I did what I had to do because someone had to, because war isn't clean and it isn't fair. And sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to keep your people safe. And Rasheed? Was he keeping anyone safe when you threw him in a cell for 3 months? Reyes faltered. That was a mistake. Intel said he was passing information to insurgents. By the time we figured out it was bad intel, the facility was being decommissioned. He should have been transferred, but you forgot about him. Left him to die. The silence stretched. Reyes looked away, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. Here's what I don't understand, Sarah continued. You have grandkids. I've seen the photos. You show them to everyone. How do you reconcile that? Being a grandfather, being a family man, with running a torture facility. I kept them safe, Reyes said quietly. Everything I did so they could grow up in a world where terrorists don't fly planes into buildings or blow up schools. I separated those worlds, home and work. I did what needed to be done so they'd never have to. That's a coward's answer. You want absolution? You want someone to tell you it's okay, that you were just doing your job? I can't give you that. No one can. Reyes straightened, the mask sliding back into place. I came here to offer you a deal. Drop the testimony, stop cooperating with the investigation, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. Honorable discharge, full benefits, a recommendation that'll get you any civilian job you want. Sarah laughed, bitter. You really think I'd take that? I think you should consider your future, because if you go through with this, you'll be fighting the entire military establishment. They'll tear apart your service record, your personal life, everything. They'll make you wish you died in that bunker. Maybe, but at least I'll be able to live with myself. Sarah looked at Price. We're done here. Price moved to escort Reyes out, but he wasn't finished. You're making a mistake, Sarah. You're choosing the hard path when there's an easy one right in front of you. And for what? Brennan's dead. Ortiz is dead. The facility's destroyed. You can't bring them back. You can't undo what happened. All you can do is ruin your own life in some misguided attempt at justice. Get him out, Sarah said. As Price led Reyes away, he called back one last time. When this is over, when you're broken and bitter and wondering if it was worth it, remember, I gave you a choice. The door closed behind him. Sarah lay back, staring at the ceiling, her shoulder throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Reyes was right about one thing. This would ruin her life. The investigations, the trials, the constant second-guessing and character assassination. Her military career was over. Her privacy was gone. Every decision she'd ever made would be scrutinized, every relationship questioned. But Brennan had died to get the truth out. Ortiz had died trying. Rasheed had survived 3 months alone to bear witness. The least Sarah could do was see it through. 3 days passed in the embassy's medical facility. Sarah's shoulder improved incrementally, still painful, still limited in motion, but healing. She spent the time being debriefed by JAG investigators, walking them through every detail of her time in the bunker. They were thorough, professional, and carefully neutral, giving her no indication of whether they believed her or thought she was embellishing. Hale visited daily, bringing news from outside. The story had exploded across global media. Protests at the Pentagon, congressional leaders calling for hearings, human rights organizations demanding a full investigation. The backlash was substantial and growing. But so was the counter-narrative. Defense Department officials characterized the facility as a temporary detention center operating under proper legal authority. They acknowledged procedural irregularities, but framed them as isolated incidents, not systemic abuse. Reyes had given interviews portraying himself as a soldier who'd made tough calls in impossible situations. The court of public opinion was splitting along predictable lines. "How's Rasheed?" Sarah asked during one of Hale's visits. "Getting stronger. The embassy's helping him apply for asylum. Given what he went through, it should be approved." Hale paused. "He wants to testify. At whatever trials or hearings come from this. He says he needs people to know he's real, not just a name in a file." Sarah understood. Bearing witness was its own form of survival. On the fourth day, Colonel Price returned with news. "We've made arrests. 3 officers directly connected to the facility's operations, including Major Reyes. They're being held at Fort Leavenworth pending court-martial proceedings." "What are the charges?" "For Reyes, dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming, and unlawful detention. We're still building the case for the more serious charges: torture, murder. The evidence is strong, but military law has specific requirements." "Will it be enough?" "Honestly, I don't know, but we're going to try." Price sat down, her formal bearing softening slightly. "I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've prosecuted deserters, war criminals, officers who abuse their authority. This case is different. The scale of it, the institutional cover-up, it goes deeper than a few bad actors." "How deep?" "Deep enough that I've been advised to proceed carefully. Deep enough that some people want this investigation to focus on individuals and not ask bigger questions about who authorized it and why." Sarah felt a familiar anger building. "So they'll sacrifice Reyes and a few others, but the system that enabled it gets protected?" "That's what they're hoping, but we're not going to let that happen." Price pulled out a folder, handed it to Sarah. "This is your discharge paperwork. Medical separation with full benefits. You're officially out of the Army as of tomorrow." Sarah opened the folder, scanned the documents. Everything was in order. Commendations for her service, medical notation about her injury, an honorable discharge. It was over. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt unmoored, like cutting the last rope tethering her to something familiar. "What will you do?" Price asked. "I don't know. Testify. Try to rebuild. Figure out who I am if I'm not a soldier." "You'll always be a soldier, Sarah. The uniform doesn't make that. The character does." Price stood. "We'll be in touch about the court-martial. In the meantime, get some rest. You've earned it." After she left, Sarah sat with the discharge papers, reading through her service record. 4 years, 3 deployments, 12 confirmed kills, multiple commendations. A career that had defined her adult life, reduced to bureaucratic language and official stamps. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. A nurse poked her head in. "You have another visitor. Says he's your brother?" Sarah's heart skipped. She didn't have a brother. "What's his name?" "Marcus Walker." Not a name she recognized. Sarah tensed, ready for another trick, another pressure tactic from whoever wanted her silent. Let him in, but stay close. The man who entered was maybe 40, athletic build, wearing jeans and a plain black shirt. He had kind eyes and a careful way of moving that suggested military training. "Sergeant Walker," he said, keeping his distance. "My name's not actually Marcus. I'm using that for security reasons. I work for an organization that specializes in protecting whistleblowers, people like you who've exposed wrongdoing and become targets because of it. I'm in an embassy. I'm already protected. For now, but eventually you'll leave here. You'll try to resume some version of normal life. And that's when people who want you silent will make their move." He pulled out a card, set it on the table. "We can help. Secure housing, identity protection, legal support. We've worked with dozens of cases like yours." Sarah studied him, looking for tells. He seemed legitimate, but so had a lot of things that turned out not to be. "Why would you help me?" "Because what you did matters. Because people need to see that telling the truth doesn't automatically mean destroying your life. Because," he paused, choosing words carefully, "I used to be where you are. Different circumstances, different agency, but I blew the whistle on illegal activities, nearly destroyed me. An organization like ours helped me survive. Now I help others." Sarah picked up the card. No name, just a phone number and an email address. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask. When you're ready to leave the embassy, call that number. We'll make sure you have options." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "What you did took courage. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially yourself." After he left, Sarah sat holding the card, turning it over in her hands. She'd thought surviving the bunker was the hard part. Now she was realizing that survival was just the beginning. The real fight, living with what she'd seen, testifying against her former command, rebuilding a life from the wreckage, was still ahead. A week after the arrests, Sarah was cleared to leave the medical facility. She moved to a secure apartment in the embassy compound, a small space with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the city. She could see the sector where the bunker had been, smoke no longer rising, but the scars still visible. The embassy staff treated her with careful respect, like she was something fragile that might break. She hated it. She'd rather have had them treat her like a soldier, give her a job, keep her busy. Instead, she had too much time to think. The news cycle had moved on to other scandals, other outrage. The story of the black site was still developing, still generating occasional headlines, but it had lost that white-hot intensity of the first few days. Sarah knew how this worked. Public attention was finite, and there was always something new to be angry about. But the legal process ground on. JAG investigators continued building their case. Congressional committees announced hearings. Human rights organizations filed lawsuits. The machinery of justice moved slowly, but it moved. Hale kept her updated through encrypted emails. The Washington Post had won a Pulitzer for their coverage, which felt surreal. Awards for exposing horror, like putting a medal on tragedy. But Hale said it mattered, said it kept the story alive when it might otherwise have been buried. Sarah started having nightmares. Not about combat, she'd had those for years and knew how to manage them. These were different. Dreams about endless corridors, about searching for Brennan in collapsed tunnels, about finding cell after cell with people she knew locked inside. She'd wake up gasping, her shoulder throbbing, convinced she could smell the bunker's stale air. The embassy psychologist recommended therapy. Sarah went twice, found it useless, stopped going. How could she explain what she'd seen to someone who'd never been there? How could she articulate the weight of carrying secrets that had gotten other people killed? On day 12, Colonel Price called her in for a meeting. Sarah expected more questions, more preparation for the court-martial. Instead, she found Price with two people she didn't recognize, a man and a woman, both in civilian clothes, both with the professional bearing of career intelligence officers. "Sergeant Walker, this is Deputy Director Carver and Assistant Director Wynn from the Defense Intelligence Agency," Price said. They have a proposal for you. Sarah sat, wary. What kind of proposal? Carver spoke first. We've been conducting our own investigation into the facility you exposed. Not the legal aspect, that's JAG's purview, but the operational aspect. Who authorized it? Who knew about it? How it was funded and staffed? And? And we've found evidence of a network. The facility you discovered wasn't isolated. There were others, at least 4 that we've confirmed, possibly more. Operating under the same off-books protocols, answering to the same small group of senior officers. Sarah felt her stomach drop. She thought the bunker was one terrible thing, but if Carver was right, it was part of something much larger. We want to shut them down, Nguyen continued, all of them. But we need someone who's been inside, who understands how they operate, someone who's already proven they're willing to do the right thing regardless of cost. You want me to help investigate? More than investigate, we want you to join a task force dedicated to dismantling this network. It's classified work, dangerous work, but it's work that needs doing. Sarah looked at Price, who gave a small nod. This is legitimate, that nod said, not a trap. Why me? Sarah asked. I'm a sniper, not an investigator. Because you've proven you can't be bought or intimidated, Carver said. Because you've seen what these facilities do, and you still chose to expose them. Because Sergeant Brennan trusted you enough to die protecting the evidence he gave you. That's worth more than any investigative training. It was a compelling pitch. The idea of actually doing something, of not just testifying but actively dismantling the system that had created the bunker, that appealed to Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. But there was a catch. There was always a catch. What's the price? She asked. You postpone your testimony, Nguyen said. The court-martial against Reyes and the others continues, but you're removed from the witness list temporarily. We can't have you in the public eye while you're working undercover. So Reyes walks? No, we have other witnesses, other evidence. The case is still strong, but your testimony would be delayed until after the task force completes its mission. Sarah understood what they were really asking. They wanted her to trade immediate justice for the possibility of future justice. To let Reyes and the others face trial without her there to testify, in exchange for the chance to take down the larger network. How long? She asked. 6 months, maybe a year, depends on what we find. Sarah stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. She thought about Brennan, about his last words. Make sure everyone knows. Testimony would do that, but dismantling the network would prevent it from happening again. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take 48 hours, but Sarah, Carver's voice carried genuine urgency. If we don't act fast, they'll scatter. They know we're coming. Every day we wait is another day they have to cover their tracks. After they left, Sarah stayed at the window, watching the sun set over the ruins. The choice before her wasn't between right and wrong. It was between 2 rights, and she didn't know which one Brennan would have wanted her to choose. Make sure everyone knows, or make sure it never happens again. Maybe, she thought, she could do both. Sarah made her decision in 47 hours, not 48. She called Carver's number and said one word, yes. The task force assembled within a week. 6 people total, Sarah, 2 DIA analysts, a forensic accountant, a signals intelligence specialist, and a former Special Forces operator named Jack Wolf, who served as team leader. They operated out of a secure facility in the Green Zone, a nondescript building that could have been anything from an accounting office to a front company. Their mission was simple in theory: trace the network of black sites, identify the officers running them, gather evidence sufficient for prosecution. In practice, it meant sifting through decades of classified records, chasing paper trails that had been deliberately obscured, and interviewing people who had every reason to lie. Sarah's role was unique. She was the only one who'd actually been inside a facility, who could identify operational patterns and security protocols. Wolf used her like a decoder key, having her review surveillance footage, floor plans, and financial records to spot inconsistencies that might indicate hidden facilities. "This one," she said during a briefing 2 weeks in, pointing at a supply requisition from 2008. "Food for 40 personnel, but the official roster shows 20. That's a 20-person gap." The forensic accountant, a woman named Lisa Chen, made a note. "Could be a clerical error, or it could be ghost detainees," Sarah countered. "People who weren't on any official record but still needed feeding." "Pull the associated documents," Wolf ordered. "Cross-reference with satellite imagery from that period. If there's a facility there, we'll find it." They worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. Sarah threw herself into it, grateful for the distraction from her own thoughts. The nightmares continued, but now she had a purpose beyond just surviving them. 3 weeks into the investigation, they got their first break. The signals intelligence specialist, a quiet man named Derek Park, found encrypted communications between two officers discussing the Eastern facility's closure. The officers were both colonels, both with connections to Reyes, both careful never to mention specific locations. But Derek was better at his job than they were at operational security. He triangulated the signal sources, traced the encryption keys, and within 48 hours had pinpointed 3 potential locations in eastern Syria. "We need boots on the ground," Wolf said, studying the map. "Satellite imagery can only tell us so much. We need someone to physically verify these sites." Everyone in the room knew who that someone would be. Sarah looked at the map, at the red pins marking suspected facilities, and felt a familiar weight settling over her. She'd thought she was done with combat zones, done with putting herself in danger. But the mission wasn't finished. Brennan's work wasn't complete. "When do we leave?" she asked. Syria was worse than Iraq. The civil war had fractured the country into a dozen competing factions, and U.S. forces operated in a gray zone, officially there to fight ISIS, unofficially involved in a dozen other operations that would never appear in any public record. Sarah and Wolf inserted with a special operations team running a separate mission in the area. They split off at the Syrian border, taking a beat-up Toyota and driving east through territory that changed hands weekly. Sarah wore civilian clothes, jeans, a hijab to blend in, body armor hidden under a loose shirt. Wolf drove, his Arabic good enough to get them through the occasional checkpoint. The first suspected facility was a bust, just an old Syrian army base that had been abandoned years ago. The second was actively used, but by Russian forces, not Americans, which left the third location, a compound 20 clicks outside Al-Hasaka, in territory nominally controlled by Kurdish forces, but functionally lawless. They approached at dusk, parking the Toyota a kilometer away and covering the rest on foot. Sarah's shoulder had healed enough for light duty, but she still felt it with every movement, a reminder of the bunker and everything that came after. The compound sat in a depression, surrounded by earthen berms and razor wire. No flags, no markings, nothing to indicate who operated it. But Sarah recognized the construction style. American contractors built to U.S. military specifications. And the security was too sophisticated for a local militia. Cameras, motion sensors, regular patrols. "That's it," she whispered to Wolf. "That's a facility." He glassed it with binoculars, counting guards, noting routines. 4 visible, probably more inside. Professional setup. "You're right, this is ours." "So what now?" "Now we document, gather evidence, and get out. We're not here to assault the place." But as they watched, a vehicle arrived, a white SUV with diplomatic plates. 2 men got out, both in civilian clothes but moving with military bearing. One of them Sarah recognized immediately, even at this distance. Tom Reyes. Sarah's hand went instinctively to the pistol hidden under her shirt. Wolf grabbed her wrist, shook his head. "Not why we're here." "He's right there, after everything he's done. And if you shoot him, we blow the entire operation. We lose the facility, we lose the evidence, we lose any chance of rolling up the network. Wolf's voice was firm but not unkind. I know what you're feeling, but we need him alive. We need him to lead us to the others. Sarah forced herself to breathe, to think tactically instead of emotionally. Wolf was right. One target didn't matter. The network did. They watched Reyes enter the compound, watched him greet the guards with casual familiarity. He was here on inspection, Sarah realized, checking on operations, making sure everything was running smoothly, which meant he felt safe, felt untouchable. That would change. For 3 hours, they maintained position, documenting everything. Wolf had a high-resolution camera with telephoto lens, capturing faces, vehicle plates, the facility's layout. Sarah sketched the compound from memory, noting defensive positions and probable weak points. When Reyes finally left, driving away in the same white SUV, they waited another hour before withdrawing. By the time they reached the Toyota, Sarah's legs were cramping and her shoulder throbbing, but they had what they needed. Good work, Wolf said as they drove back toward the border. That's facility number 3 confirmed. The task force will be pleased. How many more? Sarah asked. Could be a dozen, could be more, but now we have a pattern, we can find them faster. Sarah stared out at the desert sliding past, illuminated by the setting sun. She thought about the people in that compound, detainees probably, being held without trial, without record, without hope. People who might spend months or years in cells like the ones she'd seen, all because someone decided they were a threat. We need to shut them down, she said. All of them, fast. We will, but these things take time. Legal process, evidence collection, building cases that'll hold up in court, while people suffer. Wolf was quiet for a moment. Yeah, while people suffer. It's the price we pay for doing this right, for making sure the bastards actually face justice instead of just disappearing into some other black program. Sarah understood, but understanding didn't make it easier. Back at the Green Zone facility, they presented their findings to the task force. The photos and sketches confirmed what they'd suspected. At least 4 active facilities still operating under the same protocols as the bunker Sarah had discovered. The forensic evidence suggested dozens of detainees currently being held off books. We need to move on this, Derek said, studying the intelligence. If Reyes is visiting facilities personally, he knows we're closing in. He might start sanitizing sites, moving detainees, destroying evidence. Or killing witnesses, Lisa added quietly. The room went silent. Everyone knew she was right. The easiest way to eliminate evidence was to eliminate the people who could testify. Carver, who'd been listening via secure video feed, spoke up. We're coordinating with JAG and the Pentagon Inspector General. Simultaneous raids on all confirmed facilities, scheduled for 72 hours from now. We'll secure the sites, rescue any detainees, and arrest everyone involved. What about Reyes? Sarah asked. He'll be arrested at the same time. We've been monitoring his movements. He's due back in the States tomorrow for the court-martial proceedings. We'll take him into custody at the airport. It was a good plan. Coordinated, comprehensive, designed to prevent anyone from slipping away. But Sarah had been a soldier long enough to know that good plans had a way of falling apart when they met reality. What's my role? She asked. You'll be with the raid team hitting the Syrian facility. Your knowledge of the layout will be invaluable, and you can identify detainees who might need immediate medical attention. Sarah nodded. Back into the fire. Back to the place where this had all started, in a way. But this time, she'd be shutting it down instead of barely escaping it. The next 72 hours were a blur of preparation. Sarah trained with the raid team, Delta Force operators who treated her with professional respect once they learned she'd survived the bunker. She memorized the facility layout, planned entry points and evacuation routes, identified potential threats, and she tried not to think about what they might find inside. The night before the raid, Wolf found her in the gym, working a heavy bag despite her shoulder's protests. He watched her for a moment, then spoke. "You ready for this?" "Have to be." "That's not what I asked." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I've read your file, Sarah. I know what you went through in that bunker. Know what it cost you. If you're not ready to go back into a place like that, now's the time to say so. No judgment." Sarah stopped punching, breathing hard. "What happens if I don't go?" "The raid still happens. We have good intel, good operators. We'll manage. But you'll be missing someone who knows what to look for, someone who's been inside their system." "Yeah." Sarah looked at her hands, wrapped in tape, knuckles raw from the bag. She thought about Brennan, about Ortiz, about Rasheed starving alone in the dark, about all the people still trapped in facilities like the one she'd barely escaped. "I'm going," she said. "I have to." Wolf nodded, unsurprised. "Then get some sleep. We insert at 0400. The raid went wrong from the start. They fast-roped from Blackhawks at 0407, hitting the compound hard and fast. The gates were blown, the guards neutralized with non-lethal rounds, the building breached within 90 seconds. Textbook operation, except the facility was empty, not abandoned, recently evacuated. Sarah could see evidence everywhere. Still warm coffee in the guard shack, computers powered on but hard drives removed, detention cells with mattresses that smelled of recent occupation. "They knew," Wolf said, surveying the empty operations center. "Someone tipped them off." The raid commander, a Delta major named Peterson, was on the radio immediately. "All teams report. What's your status?" The responses came back one by one. Iraq facility, empty. Afghanistan facility, empty. The fourth site in Jordan, empty. Every single facility had been evacuated within the last 12 hours. "Reyes," Sarah said. "He must have—" "Reyes is in custody," Carver's voice cut in over the command net. "We arrested him at Dulles 3 hours ago. He couldn't have warned anyone." "Then who?" Wolf asked. The answer came from Derek, working furiously on a laptop he'd connected to the facility's remaining network infrastructure. "I've got access to their communications log. Encrypted message sent to all facilities 6 hours ago. Source is Jesus." "What?" Peterson demanded. "The source IP traces back to the Pentagon, Defense Intelligence Agency." The implications crashed over Sarah like a physical weight. Someone inside the task force, inside DIA itself, had warned the network. They had a mole. "Shut down the operation," Carver ordered, his voice tight. "All teams extract immediately. We've been compromised." But Sarah was already moving, heading deeper into the facility. Because empty or not, there might still be evidence. There might still be something that could. She found it in the final detention cell. Not a person, not documents, just words, scratched into the concrete wall with something sharp. "They moved us, 7 trucks, heading west, June 17. Today's date." Sarah keyed her radio. "I've got something. Detainee left a message. 7 trucks heading west departed today." "West from here means Turkey," Wolf said, joining her in the cell. "They're moving the prisoners across the border, probably planning to hold them somewhere new while we clean up the old sites." Peterson made a command decision. "We have eyes on the border crossing?" "Negative," Derek responded. "But I can pull satellite imagery, track vehicle movement from this location." "Do it. Fast." Peterson looked at Sarah and Wolf. "If we can intercept those trucks before they cross into Turkey, we might salvage this." It was a long shot. The trucks had a 6-hour head start. The border was porous with dozens of crossing points, and they had no idea which route the convoy would take. But it was the only shot they had. They piled into helicopters and gave chase, racing across the Syrian desert as Derek fed them real-time updates from satellite tracking. He'd identified 7 vehicles matching the description, moving in convoy formation, taking back roads to avoid checkpoints. They're heading for the New Sabin crossing, Derek reported. ETA to Turkish border, 40 minutes. Can we beat them there? Peterson asked the pilot. Negative. Best we can do is intercept 5 clicks short of the border. Then that's what we do. Peterson turned to his team. This is a rescue op, not combat. Priority is securing the detainees alive. Engage the guards only if necessary. Clear? A chorus of affirmatives. Sarah checked her gear for the 3rd time. She'd been issued an M4 and body armor for this mission, though her role was supposed to be advisory. But plans had a way of changing, and she wanted to be ready. The helicopters screamed across the desert, flying low and fast, terrain following to avoid radar. Sarah watched the landscape blur past, rocky outcroppings, dry riverbeds, the occasional village huddled around a well. The same terrain soldiers had fought over for thousands of years, and nothing ever really changed. Target in sight, the pilot announced. Sarah leaned to look through the windscreen. 7 trucks, white with canvas covers, driving in tight formation down a dirt road. No military markings, no escort vehicles. Trying to look like a civilian convoy. The helicopters split up, 2 coming in from the north, 2 from the south, boxing in the trucks. The lead vehicle tried to accelerate, but there was nowhere to go, just open desert on both sides. The trucks stopped. Sarah's helicopter touched down 50 meters from the convoy. She was out before the skids settled, moving with the Delta team toward the vehicles. The drivers had their hands up, smart enough not to resist, but it was the backs of the trucks that mattered. Peterson's team cleared them one by one. The first truck, empty. The second, supplies. The third, "We've got detainees," someone called out. Sarah ran to the truck, climbed up into the bed. 20 people, maybe more, sitting with their hands zip-tied, heads covered with hoods. Men and women, all ages. Some were crying. Others sat in shock-still silence. She started removing hoods, cutting zip ties. "You're safe," she told them in English, then what little Arabic she knew. "American military, you're safe now." A man grabbed her arm, his eyes wild with fear and hope. "How long?" he asked in accented English. "How long we have been prisoner?" Sarah checked his wrists, saw the marks of long-term restraint, the muscle atrophy. "I don't know, but you're free now. It's over." Except it wasn't over. Because as they processed the detainees, as they documented injuries and recorded statements, Sarah realized something was wrong. These weren't the people who'd been held at the Syrian facility. These were different prisoners from different facilities, all consolidated into one convoy. "They're sanitizing the entire network," Wolf said, reaching the same conclusion. "Moving all the detainees to one location, probably planning to—" He didn't finish, but he didn't have to. Sarah understood. Consolidate the evidence, then eliminate it. All at once, efficiently. "How many detainees total?" she asked. Peterson was getting reports from the other trucks. 73, ranging from 2 months to 3 years in detention. All of them undocumented, all of them off any official record. 73 people who'd been erased from existence. 73 Rasheeds, locked away and forgotten. But not anymore. Sarah moved through the trucks, helping medics assess injuries, talking to detainees who spoke English, just being present for the ones who didn't. She saw things that would fuel new nightmares, scars from torture, psychological damage that might never heal, the hollow look of people who'd given up hope. And she saw relief, tears, the slow realization that this was real, that they were actually being rescued. In the 5th truck, she found someone she recognized. Not by face, she'd never seen him before, but by the dog tag still around his neck, hidden under his shirt. SGT Marcus Chen. The name from Sergeant Chen's patrol. Not related, just coincidence. But this Chen had been missing for 8 months, listed as KIA after an IED attack. Except he wasn't KIA. He'd been captured and detained, buried in the black site system while his family mourned. Marcus Chen? Sarah asked. He looked up, confused, like he'd forgotten that was his name. I'm U.S. Army. We're taking you home. He started crying. The extraction was chaotic. 73 detainees, most in poor health, all traumatized, all needing medical attention and documentation. The Delta team worked efficiently, coordinating with medevac helicopters, establishing a secure perimeter, managing what had become a humanitarian operation. Sarah helped where she could, but mostly she just bore witness. Listened to stories in broken English and pantomime, held hands, promised that this time someone was listening, someone cared, someone would make sure it didn't happen again. She was with a group of detainees when Carver's voice came over her radio. Sarah, I need you on the command net, now. She jogged to the communications truck, where Peterson and Wolf were gathered around a secure laptop. Carver's face filled the screen, and he looked older than he had 72 hours ago. We've identified the leak, he said without preamble. Deputy Director Nguyen. She's been feeding information to the network since before the task force was formed. Sarah felt the betrayal like a physical blow. Nguyen had recruited her, had looked her in the eye and talked about doing the right thing. And all along she'd been protecting the very system they were trying to dismantle. Where is she now? Wolf asked. In the wind, left her apartment, her office, disappeared completely. We're tracking her movements, but, Carver shook his head, she had access to everything, every safe house, every operational plan, every witness identity. She's burned the entire investigation. What about the detainees we just rescued? Sarah demanded. She can't bury them. There are too many witnesses now. You're right. The detainees are safe. We've got them in protective custody, and their existence is documented by too many people to cover up. But the legal case against the network? The evidence we spent months gathering? Nguyen's already started discrediting it, claiming it was obtained illegally, planted, falsified. She's good at her job, and she's been preparing for this contingency. So they win, Sarah said flatly. Reyes and the others walk. Not necessarily. We still have your testimony. We still have Rasheed. We still have the physical evidence from this rescue. It's not the clean prosecution we wanted, but it's something. Something. After everything they'd been through, everyone who died, all they had was something. Peterson spoke up. What about the facilities themselves? Can we at least shut them down? Already done. The ones we know about anyway. But there could be others we haven't found. The network's bigger than we thought, with tentacles into multiple agencies. This is going to take years to fully unravel. Years. Sarah thought about Brennan, who tried to fight the system and ended up buried in it. About Ortiz, executed for threatening to expose the truth. About herself, standing in the Syrian desert surrounded by freed prisoners, wondering if any of it had made a difference. The court-martial for Reyes and the others proceeds in 2 weeks, Carver continued. We need you back in the States to testify. With Nguyen's betrayal, your testimony is more critical than ever. You're still willing? Sarah looked at the trucks, at the detainees being loaded onto medevac helicopters, at the evidence of suffering being carefully documented and photographed. She thought about the impossible choice she'd been given. Testify now or dismantle the network, and realized she'd ended up doing both. Yeah, she said, I'm willing. The flight back to the States took 14 hours. Sarah spent most of it in a medical transport with some of the rescued detainees, including Marcus Chen. He was in bad shape, malnourished, infected wounds, possible internal injuries from beatings. But he was alive, and he was talking. I thought I was dead, he told Sarah. When they grabbed me after the IED, I thought they were insurgents, thought they'd execute me on video. Instead, they took me to a facility, American facility, American guards. I didn't understand. You weren't supposed to understand. You were supposed to disappear. My family, do they know? My wife, my kids, do they think? They think you're dead, but we can fix that. We will fix that. Marcus closed his eyes, tears leaking out. 8 months. 8 months I was in there, thinking I'd never see them again. Sarah squeezed his hand. She didn't have words that would make it better. Sometimes there weren't any. Rasheed was on the same flight. He'd insisted on coming, on being present for the court-martial. I need to see him, he told Sarah. I need to look at the man who did this and tell him he failed, that I survived. It was a long way from the broken man Sarah had found in that cell. Rasheed had gained weight. His eyes were clearer. His English had improved. But the scars remained, physical and psychological. Those would never fully heal. The plane landed at Dover Air Force Base in the pre-dawn darkness. There were no cameras, no press. This was still classified. But there were military police waiting, and JAG prosecutors, and caseworkers from the Defense Department. And there was Colonel Price. She greeted Sarah with a handshake that became a brief hug. "Welcome home, Sergeant. Hell of a thing you pulled off." We pulled off. All of us. Sarah gestured to the detainees being offloaded, each one being documented and processed. What happens to them now? Medical care, debriefing, resettlement. The ones who worked with U.S. forces will be offered asylum. The others, Price hesitated. It's complicated. Some of them were detained because someone thought they were threats. Turns out they weren't. But we can't just release them back to countries that might kill them for cooperating with us. So they trade one prison for another. A better prison. But yeah, Price's expression was pained. This is the part they don't teach you at the academy. What to do with the people who fall through the cracks of our own system. We're doing our best, but best isn't always good enough. Sarah understood. She'd spent months learning that the system was bigger than individuals, more resilient than good intentions, and resistant to change even when that change was desperately needed. "The court-martial," she said. "When do I testify?" 2 days. We've accelerated the timeline given the new circumstances. Reyes and 3 other officers are facing charges. With Nguyen's betrayal, the case is weaker than we'd like, but your testimony should tip the scales. Should? Sarah, I need to prepare you. Reyes's lawyers are good. They're going to attack your credibility, your mental state, your motivations. They're going to paint you as a troubled soldier who cracked under pressure and invented a conspiracy to explain your own failings. Let them try. Price smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's the spirit, but remember, this isn't combat. You can't shoot your way out of a cross-examination. You have to stay calm, stay factual, and trust the truth. Truth hasn't been doing so great lately. No, but it's still all we have. The court-martial took place at Fort Bragg, in a courtroom that had seen decades of military justice. Sarah sat in the witness room, waiting her turn, listening to the proceedings through speakers. Rasheed testified first, describing his detention with painful clarity. The defense tried to discredit him. He was an Iraqi national. He had no documentation proving he'd worked for the U.S. His story could have been invented for asylum purposes. But he held firm, answering every question with quiet dignity. Marcus Chen testified second. Harder to discredit, he was active duty, with military records and a family who'd mourned him. But the defense pivoted, suggesting he'd been captured by insurgents, and his memories of American detention were confused or false, products of torture-induced psychosis. Other witnesses followed. Guards who'd worked at the facilities and been granted immunity in exchange for testimony. Intelligence analysts who'd flagged irregularities. Even one of the detainees from the truck convoy, a Syrian translator who'd been held for 18 months. And through it all, Tom Reyes sat at the defense table, looking like a grandfather who'd stumbled into the wrong room. His lawyers had dressed him well, pressed uniform, all his decorations, the image of a dedicated soldier being persecuted for doing his duty. When Sarah was finally called, the courtroom fell silent. Everyone knew who she was, what she represented. The soldier who'd blown the whistle. the one who'd started everything. She took the stand, was sworn in, and faced the prosecutor, a JAG captain named Martinez, who'd been preparing her for this moment. Sergeant Walker, please tell the court how you came to discover the facility in question. Sarah told the story. The ambush, the fall through the floor, finding Brennan, and the evidence. She spoke calmly, factually, keeping her emotions in check. Just the facts. The prosecutor led her through the details. What she'd seen, what she'd found, what Brennan had told her. Sarah described the detention cells, the torture equipment, the files documenting deaths. She identified photographs of the facility, of the documents, of the victims. And then came the cross-examination. Reyes's lead attorney was a civilian, a former military prosecutor who'd gone private and made a fortune defending officers accused of war crimes. His name was Chambers, and he approached Sarah with the careful courtesy of a predator assessing prey. Sergeant Walker, you suffered a significant shoulder injury during the incident you described, correct? Yes. And you'd lost a considerable amount of blood by the time you entered the bunker? Yes. Were you experiencing symptoms of shock, confusion, altered mental state? I was focused on survival. That's not what I asked, Chambers smiled. Were you experiencing confusion or altered mental state due to blood loss and trauma? Sarah saw where this was going. I was lucid enough to navigate the bunker, contact command, and evade hostile forces. My judgment was sound. But you'd been told by Corporal Brennan, a deserter wanted for theft of classified materials, that this facility was a torture site. You took his word for it? I saw the evidence myself. The cells, the equipment, the files. Files that conveniently disappeared when the facility collapsed. Files that only you and a wanted deserter claim to have seen. The thumb drive. The thumb drive provided by journalists who had their own agenda. Who stands to benefit from this story, Sergeant Walker? You've been offered book deals, movie rights. You're a hero to some people. That's quite a change from being a sniper with PTSD, isn't it? Martinez objected. The judge sustained. But the damage was done. The suggestion planted that Sarah had financial motives, that she was seeking fame or redemption. Chambers continued, relentless. He questioned her perception, her memory, her interpretation of events. He suggested Brennan had manipulated her, that the journalist had used her, that she'd convinced herself of a conspiracy because the alternative, that she'd simply survived a combat injury, wasn't dramatic enough. Sarah held firm, but she could feel the ground shifting beneath her, could see the jury, senior officers who'd spent careers in the system, starting to doubt. When she finally stepped down, 3 hours later, she felt hollowed out. Price met her in the hallway. You did well, Price said. Did I? Because it felt like he just tore me apart. That's his job, but you stayed consistent, stayed calm. The jury will see that. Will they see the truth? Price didn't answer immediately. I hope so, but Sarah, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that they won't. That Reyes and the others could be acquitted or face reduced charges. That despite everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed, the system might protect its own. Sarah looked back at the courtroom, where Reyes sat surrounded by lawyers and supporters, where the machinery of military justice ground on, slow and implacable, and not always just. Then what was it all for? She asked quietly. For them. Price nodded toward a side room where the rescued detainees waited, ready to testify if called. For the 73 people who are free because of you. For every future detainee who won't be thrown into a black site because the world knows they exist now. For the truth, Sarah. Even if the truth doesn't always win in court, it still matters. The deliberations took 2 days. Sarah spent them in a safe house outside Fayetteville, waiting, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. When the verdict finally came, she was back in the courtroom, surrounded by press and protesters and military personnel whose opinions ranged from hero worship to outright hostility. The jury filed in. The judge called for order. Tom Reyes stood to receive the verdict. On the charge of dereliction of duty, guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming, guilty. On the charge of unlawful detention, the foreman paused, and in that pause, Sarah felt the weight of everything hinging on the next word. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Sarah felt tears she hadn't known were building spill down her cheeks. Reyes remained standing, face impassive, as the judge continued reading the verdicts. Guilty on 12 of 15 charges. The others, the torture, the murders, remained unproven, lacking sufficient evidence. But it was enough. It was something. Sentencing came a week later. 20 years at Fort Leavenworth for Reyes. Similar sentences for the other defendants. Not life, not the justice that Brennan and Ortiz deserved, but justice nonetheless. Sarah stood outside the courthouse afterward, facing cameras for the first time. Hale was there, recording, along with dozens of other journalists. They wanted a statement, wanted her to sum up what this all meant. "I just want to say," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the crowd, "that this verdict isn't about me. It's about Corporal James Brennan, who died protecting the evidence. About Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, who was murdered for trying to tell the truth. About Rasheed Al-Hakim and Marcus Chen, and 71 others who survived detention in facilities that shouldn't have existed. About every person who was betrayed by the system meant to protect them." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I'm a soldier. I was trained to follow orders, to trust my chain of command, to believe in the institution. And I still do believe in the idea of what we're supposed to be. But this case proves we need to be vigilant. We need to question authority when authority is wrong. We need to speak up even when it's dangerous, even when it costs us everything." "What's next for you?" someone called out. Sarah smiled, tired but genuine. "I don't know. I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm not sure what I am. But I know there's still work to do. Still people who need help. Still secrets that need exposing. So I guess I keep going. We all keep going." She walked away from the cameras then, toward where Rasheed and Marcus waited with their families. Toward the future, uncertain but free. The bunker was buried, but its truth lived on. And that, Sarah thought, would have to be enough.